And with that, on due time, let's move ahead to our next discussion and session about Capital Markets 2047 Macroeconomic Reforms Fueling India's Growth Through Markets and Policy Reforms. For this, we have with us as our moderator and an individual addressee is Venkat N. Chalasani, who is the Chief Executive of AMFI, a seasoned banking and financial services professional with decades of leadership experience in the India's financial sector. The Managing Director of the State Bank of India, where he played a key role in policy implementation and strategic growth initiatives. Over the years, he's held various and multiple prominent positions. With that, thank you so much to Venkat for joining us. Such an honor always welcoming you. Please, let's give him a big round of applause as we welcome him on stage. And joining Venkat would be our eminent panelists, starting with Mr. Parwal, of course, the Managing Director, SPA Capital Services Limited, a passionate entrepreneur known for his spearheading strategic initiatives and operational excellence in the financial solutions sector. He's somebody who specializes in designing and delivering high-impact, sustainable businesses, advisory services tailored to their client needs. He's going to be shortly joining us in the room, but allow me an opportunity to move ahead and take the liberty of calling our next panelists on stage. We also have Venkat Thiagarajan, the Chairman and Independent Director and member of SEBI. He's a Chairman of SYFX Treasury Foundation and Mr. Sandeep Parwal has just joined in. An organization focused on treasury management and financial market education. He's known for his expertise in foreign exchange treasury operations and risk management. His extensive experience in banking and financial service plays a key role in monitoring the professionals and promoting best practices. Let's please take the opportunity of welcoming him on stage. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a big round of applause. And we're also joined by Gaurav Garg, who's a seasoned fintech and BFSI business leader with extensive experience in driving CX excellence revenue growth and has led some large-scale digital and AI-driven transformation initiatives. Gaurav, to take the opportunity of joining us on stage. And also, if we do have in the room, we'd also take the opportunity, and I'm going to be calling it out, if we have the CFO, Vari Renewable Tech Limited, Mr. Dilip Panch. Yes, so is right here. Let's give him a warm round of applause as we welcome him. I believe one of our panelists whom we called out isn't right now in the room, but we'd like to take the opportunity of passing on the live baton to our moderator, Venkat ji, for taking it forward.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. My sincere thanks to Dr. Narendra for inviting me to this very engaging and forward-looking panel discussion. As India approaches towards 2047, the centenary for independence, the ambition of becoming Viksit Bharat, a $30 trillion economy, is no longer aspirational. It is structural now. Growth, what we are looking for, must be supported by the financial system, which is capable of scaling without compromising the stability. That is extremely important. The question is not whether the India will grow. Each one of us is confident that India is going to grow. But what is more important is that whether our financial architecture is ready to sustain this growth. So historically, if you look at the Indian economy, the banking financial sector, we see that India has been a banked economy, and banks had financed the development, the intermediated savings, and stabilized the cycles. They have been the bedrock for our progress. Yet an economy of $30 trillion cannot rely predominantly on the banking's balance sheets alone. Long duration capital, risk diversification, infrastructure financing, and innovation cannot be carried by banks alone. We are seeing the banks are doing a great job, but they alone cannot do this. They require a deep, broad, and resilient capital markets working alongside with this banking system. And by 2047, when we're looking at Viksit Bharat, the capital markets must evolve beyond instruments of liquidity. They must become the very pillars of macroeconomic architecture. So the capital markets are not just mechanisms, they are the architectures of resilience. They determine how the risk is allocated across all sectors. They determine how long-term capital is raised and deployed. They determine how the shocks can be absorbed, how innovation and enterprise are financed, and how sustainability is embedded in every financial flow. So with this short framing that I'm looking at, I mean the way in which the capital markets are going to develop to take the economy towards the Viksit Bharat, let me turn to our distinguished panel. I mean, we're comprising, you heard the speaker talking about all these people, and I would like to take their insights by discussing with them. So, first let me start with Mr. Sandeep. As India progresses and move towards Viksit 2047, what structural transformation do you foresee in capital markets over the next 2 decades? Are we looking for an incremental evolution or institutional redesign?
So as India moves forward for the 2047 target, the kind of pace which the industry is seeing in terms of growth, whether it's banking or new forms of capital formation. Now specifically, mutual funds in itself have grown huge. AIFs are also picking up big. Now there are new instruments and vehicles also coming up. The global challenges and the turmoil or the uncertainties perhaps will attract NRIs and international investments also to India, especially with the Gift Route City. That should also be a good beginning. And the best part about it is the growth is being done in a very disciplined format. There is a regulatory control over things, there is a participation, it's a retail participation, and everything apparently from the regulator to the fund managers to the AMCs to the sponsors, and all stakeholders have contributed meaningfully. That's the way if the capital formation, domestic private capital formation is done and what is being deployed, then it will certainly add meaningful value and contribute along with the banks for development of the economy. Having said this, trust, transparency, and the regulatory control has to be very critical and very closely tracked and watched, monitored, implemented in all aspects. Because as the balance sheet size rises, the growth of the economy when we were $700 billion, now we are $4 trillion, and $4 trillion looks too huge and happy scenario for everyone. Perhaps it will be much more happier, and it has to be happier. There will not be anything surprising in that. 30 looks mind-boggling, sir. So it really is large. Are we able to control that? And because when the speed and the pace and the height increases, the risk of the debacle is also equally large. And we have to make sure, and specifically the regulators, institutions, all other separate participants have to make sure that we do not go wrong on any of these aspects. So that critical component is what I believe will be the key factor. Because growth, even if it slows down by a year or so, can be managed. But a mistake or a mishap will be really harmful, is what I believe. Currently, the industry has really moved well in terms of trust, transparency, disclosures. Are there gaps in that? Perhaps there might be some, but are they being raised adequately, and are they being addressed? The regulator is very watchful, tries to address them. Are they being, because all I want to say is that in a controlled environment with participation, if the growth is there, they'll be able to sustain meaningfully. Otherwise, each generation will have a objective of shortchanging its next generation and trying to prepone the growth. They want to encash it. The greed takes over. Is in a hurry. They want to just encash things in advance. I feel that I should be getting what I could be earning in next 20 years. Why don't I earn it in next 2 years? And that kind of short change, we are certain to grow. Indian economy is set to move, but can we move at a stable pace sustainably? I think will be a transformative factor. If we get more logical and in terms of doing these factors, a small piece I'd like to add also, like in the F&O segment on the equity markets or in some other segments or maybe some other components, the finance ministry raises these points and the regulator has expressed concern. They are trying to address it, but they have not been able to address it. So how they can address it is something which needs to be observed, and I believe that, I'm sure that the regulator will be able to address it. Transparency and trust needs to be maintained all through, is all I'll say. Thus, any shortcomings over there will be really bad for.
Very well said. I mean, strong regulatory framework supported by trust and transparency is a bedrock for our Viksit or growth towards Viksit Bharat. That's very well said. Tyaguji, I mean, you are very fond of you. I know you from so many years. And you are an expert both in the corporate bond market and the forex markets. So let me just change the question from the direction. What I would like to understand from you, because people look at you as a rupee expert. So do you see that rupee evolving into a meaningfully internationalized currency by 2047? And what structural preconditions must be put in place this to happen? We have seen the path for the capital account convertibility. Now we are talking about internationalizing the rupee. And by 2047, how do you shape that?
Thanks, Venkat. Actually, let us first define what is internationalization. Internationalization of a currency refers to widespread, regular, frequent use of the rupee amongst non-residents as a minimum payment as well as a store of value.
Correct.
That is the first definition, number one. We are aiming for that. That's the thing. Number two, why international usage of the currency happens actually. The economy, markets and international usage of the currency are interrelated. It is a virtuous circle. As the economy grows, possibly it delivers a higher rate of return. As the higher rate of return is delivered, the international investors come into your country and then the markets channel those sources of capital into the growth areas. So basically, as you grow up in the ladder, naturally the aspirations of becoming an international currency naturally come to you. It's natural. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen organically or inorganically. There are, let us say, 3 preconditions I will put. You tick your boxes and then you decide yourself whether we are there in the picture or not. Number 1, role of the currency in global trade. That is very important. Unless your currency becomes an invoicing currency and then getting embedded into the banking architecture globally and then graduates into being a transaction currency and then eventually ends up in a reserve currency. See, basically 100 years back, US dollar overthrew sterling basically because of sheer trade dominance. Now, actually, let us put some numbers. Right now, 35 trillion dollar is a global trade. 8 trillion is US. Let us say 7 trillion is China, and let us say 6 trillion is Europe. We stand at 1.5 trillion. So, unless you generate global trade to the equivalent of $4 trillion, $1 trillion in 4 years from now on, you are not going to be counted as a large economy by then. So you take Europe, they have been struggling for 26 years. It's a realistic, it's not, maybe not be popular, I don't mind it. 27 years they have been struggling to inch higher, but unfortunately they are not able to do it actually. China with $3 trillion reserves, they are not able to inch higher actually. Number two condition, the geopolitical foundation of the currency should be very strong. That is, you should be a member of or a leader of a military alliance. It may be too naive to suggest that, but it is a practical. Otherwise, Swiss franc would have been a reserve currency long back. Number three, credibility of the institutions and the institutional independence. They are the bedrocks of a reserve currency. That is why the talks of independence of Fed going for a toss, immediately there is a wobble. Can you believe, since 1970, there have been 34 crises, fiscal and monetary, across the world. None of them impacted US. Basically because they came out of every crisis, basically because they are institutions, institutional credibility. Now, these 3 points, you just tick your boxes actually. If you are ticking all the 3 boxes, you are going to be the international currency. Of course, it appears to me as of now, this China with the $3 trillion is not able to do it basically because they fall short on the institutional credibility. And then Europe is not able to become a reserve currency or an international currency basically because they fall short on the point 2. So you have got this competition. Whether we will be able to do it, that's a basic question. To my knowledge, actually, possibly whatever that has happened in the last 300 years may not be applicable for the next, let us say, 30 years. May be true, that argument could be true. But based on what has happened in the past 300 years, I feel it is very difficult to ask to become an international currency. That need not be our objective as of now.
Yeah. It's quite challenging to think about making our currency an international currency. I fully agree with you. It needs liquidity, it needs all the 3 points that you have very well articulated. Thank you, Thiago. I'll come back to you on other points. But before I talk to you, Mr. Dilip, I would like to talk to Mr. Chandrasekhar. Sir, one point, because you are an expert in the commodities, we talked about the capital markets, we talked about the forex markets. So just in 2021, if you look back, almost around 7 commodities have been banned. Although SEBI had come out with this ban, they did not mention it very explicitly, the reasons why these commodities have been banned from trading. But underlying was the inflation targeting. I mean, they said that these commodities the trading might result into the creating the inflation. So my question to you, sir, is how should this commodities market, can we make this commodities market support India's inflation targeting framework?
When you talk of commodities, 7 contracts of agri-commodities primarily, they are not banned, they're suspended. It's a play on words, basically. Suspended. If we have to get over this policy uncertainty, and this suspension has actually shaken the confidence of the market. Even if this suspension is lifted tomorrow, don't expect people to jump into this market. And therefore, they're very, very wary of this suspension. And until now, there has been no explanation why these contracts have been suspended. That's another part. Therefore, this market, the commodity derivatives market, in my view, and I'm being very frank, I'm not a diplomat, therefore I'll be very forthright, is facing multiple challenges. One is actually a political challenge. Because with due respect to everybody, the policy makers have some, what should I say, unfounded fear about agriculture commodity derivatives. They are actually preventing stakeholders, value chain participants from their price risk management platform. But what can we do? This is a political decision. It is much less of an economic rationale. Therefore, we have to accept it. Therefore, this commodity derivatives market is subject to political risk. That political risks transform to business risk. And stakeholders are facing that business risk. This is a stark reality we need to understand. But how do we address this? First, we need to further strengthen our real economy. The real economy is agriculture. Real economy is manufacturing. And when you talk of commodities, agriculture and food products, when we talk of metals, industrial metals, base metals, and precious metals, all energy products, whether it is crude oil, natural gas, coal, whatever, all of that, those are real economies. We need to strengthen that real economy in terms of enhanced production, enhanced processing, enhanced consumption, and enhanced trade, for which we need to invest adequately in that real economy. And with due respect again, that is actually not happening. And that is why, I don't want to sound negative, but I think we have to be realistic. Why is our agriculture languishing? We have all the factors of production in our favor in our country. I can give you a list of those. I think that's not the context. The point is, our agriculture has no business to languish. Our productivity levels must increase. Farmers' income must increase. But why are they not rising? Why are they not increasing? There is something fundamentally wrong with our policy approach towards agriculture. And I have written policy papers, I have written commentaries. The government has asked me to write policy papers on pulses, oilseeds, all of that I've given. But there is no action. For the key to this is we need to address the challenges facing the real economy. And if you're referring to agriculture, obviously climate change, land constraints, water shortage, these are the real challenges. We need to address them. And this is not rocket science. It is possible. It's not easy. It's a challenge, but it is still doable. But that needs enormous political will. And with due respect, again, I'm sorry, I don't see demonstration of that kind of political will which is required to transform. Yeah. I don't know if I have answered your question.
Thank you, sir. But I would like to understand how do we have this real economy while you talked about it, but commodity markets are extremely essential in order to ensure that the target that we are looking at is achieved. I'll come back to you, sir, on this particular point, sir.
Yeah, okay.
But I would like to ask Mr. Dilip, you're an expert in renewables, and 2 days back or 3 days back, you have seen Niti Aayog coming out with a report talking about targeting net carbon zero. And they said we need around $22.7 trillion. While we are, by 2070, of course, this is not 2047, which we are aiming for our Viksit Bharat, but 2070, we said $22.7 trillion. And trust me, capital markets is one of the most important means to support the $22.7 trillion that we are looking for. Can you tell me how the ecosystem can be developed, this capital ecosystem can be developed to support this gigantic target?
Thank you, good evening. Yesterday also I was speaking on this renewable energy topic, and this Niti Aayog's paper calling for roughly 22 to 24 trillion. But the estimates have been varying between 10 trillion and 24 trillion. Anyway, figure keeps changing, but the talk of net zero has been happening since 4 years, in the making. Ever since that 500 gigawatt has been sounded out by Ministry of Renewable Energy, they've been talking. But from a policy framework, we are absent in every respect, We have schemes, not policies, What is important, the difference between policy and scheme is completely lacking, When you come back to capital markets to fund this $24 trillion is actually not a gigantic task, because if you peg 60 billion that we invested last year and you compound annual growth rates to 44 years, it's about 8 to 9%. India is supposedly, take any estimate, EY estimate, IMF estimate, give and take $3 to $4 trillion, India is supposed to be $30 trillion by 2047 or 2050, again 3-year gap, on the number front. That is again between 6 to 7% CAGR. If you take EY, you are 6%. If you don't take EY, you are 7%. So that number, if you compare with peer economies, what they have done in the past, is not very far off. Post that anyway, it's a transformative GDP growth going up and down by 3 to 4%. So what I want to emphasize is not a gigantic task. What is problematic is, as I mentioned to you, policies. We have nearly zero depth in our bond market. Take for example, if you want to develop a bond market, which should be at least roughly to the size of 50% of your GDP. So we are $4 trillion, you have $2 trillion of bond market that you are speaking. Bulk of the loan book still emerges from banks or institutions. I'm not naming insurance, I'm still keeping out. I'm saying bank and non-bank cumulatively put together generates a significant loan book. You ask them, would you like to underwrite a debenture? They will say no. Immediately comes RBI risk weights and they are out. So, your practical problems are never understood in capital market front. Like you did OTC markets for equity paper, which is today BSE, NSE. It has evolved from OTC to today. You could consider what banks can list themselves, as a way forward. What will it achieve that they are not doing today is actually stamp duty. State governments are greedy for their revenues. There is no talk between center and states on how do we remove. Then there is a stamp duty shopping. People want to go to New Delhi, people want to go to Gujarat just to avoid stamp duty, and then, So deepening this bond market is very, very essential, because globally, bonds are quite larger than equity in both derivative and on the delivered market, both. So, this has to have an awakening in SEBI. Reforms are not incremental. Reforms are everyday affair. The way business happens, reforms have to happen as business. So this must be, registered by SEBI, etc. When the government's vision is going up to, for the first time we are seeing, 2047 vision, China always had a 50-year roadmap. We are seeing for the first time. So when you make 50-year plan, you cut down into 5-year, 3-year plans to achieve that 50-year roadmap. These are very essential reforms, You talk to industry, you listen to industry. That's not happening, So these are very important. But as I mentioned in the beginning note, that 9% is not achievable growth. If you look at actual Nifty and Sensex over 30-year trajectory, 20-year trajectory, it had delivered minimum between 15 to 18 give and take where your measurement begins, So it's not that, bond market cannot deliver. You create an ecosystem even in bond derivatives. You create a market makers in bond derivatives to at least infuse, Then there are incentives that you need to give to them. All that is right now, nobody is even talking about it. So once they begin to speak, debt market comes in, 24 trillion is not far off. That I am speaking at the domestic front. Then you come at the international capital, which you have to attract. The international capital is all available. It's a matter of returns. If your rupee is depreciating 3.5%, in the current environment, he is losing 3.5%. He needs to be compensated, As a policy framework, I remember government came up with masala bonds way back in 2014. And I don't want to name a company. We actually did, it was not called masala bond. there was a policy vacuum where it falls, whether it falls in FDI or whether it falls in ECB. And people were taking arbitrage advantage. So RBI came and plugged. You don't plug the gap, you define it properly. If it is a rupee ECB, you just say it that, RBI is permitting rupee ECB, but it will have ECB implications, period. Now, once they did it, now see it's happening, So these, instead of incremental reforms, if you deepen the reforms on an everyday basis, listening to industry, I don't think 24 trillion or any trillion number by 2070, because we are talking 44 years, is an insurmountable challenge.
Good to hear, Mr. Dilip. But before I go to Mr. Tyagu, if you listen, I think the finance minister heard you, and then she's made a statement that they are going to introduce money market making body. In this budget, you would have heard her saying. And second, introduction of total return swaps. These two things they have introduced in the budget. Of course, we need yet to wait and see what they're going to do on this particular front. And in the Niti Aayog report, if I remember correctly, they're talking about $15 trillion available locally, and around $7 trillion is what we are required to bring it from the overseas in order to fill that particular gap and then achieve our net zero. So what is your reaction to the finance ministers setting up this market making body? So corporate bond market is something that Tyagu and I would have discussed many times in various fora, because that's something which is very, very close to our heart, and good that you brought it out. But what do you think that about these two measures?
One step forward, two step backward. And I will quote it with an example, like Mr. Chandrasekhar was also mentioning that suspended commodities. I'll give you one more example, They recently raised STT on derivative market. And on one side, you are trying to deepen F&O market. I know there's a challenge out that, the government is trying to address. But what are the ways and means to achieve them? You don't raise transaction cost. Like there are tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers. You raise non-tariff barriers in F&O, that what sort of people can come, what sort of institutions can come. Yeah. You just cannot go on and increase transaction cost arbitrarily, I have seen many individual option writers who are making tons of money. Now they are out. And if they are out, how will you deepen? Yeah. And the derivative market is not deepened, how will the jobbers will come in, So it is one step forward. So 15 trillion and 17 trillion gap is a number. But at the end of the day, I said one thing. Any investor has only one thing in mind. What is my post-tax return?
Yeah. True. You need speculators in the market. Yes, sir.
Just believe you me, when commodity options were introduced, I did write about this. I did raise this point, saying for an options writer, you need to have some financial qualification and capitalization. Without that, Tom, Dick and Harry would become options writers. That's extraordinarily risky. Therefore, I completely agree with him. I've raised all these issues. But because in the equity market, options writer, there is no financial qualification, I was told that why should commodity derivatives have it? Anyway,
just adding to Mr. Chandrasekhar, it is getting elongated. It's a full day topic. But one last thing I would like to add. Options writing is a contract at the end of the day. You go to US market, see the depth of their market. They can write any contract. In India, there is no honoring the contract, forget about writing it, Specific Performance Act amendment has been talked ever since Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister. It was reiterated back in 2015, I remember, that, this government wants to bring in. Nobody speaks about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. The liquidity, the institutions, all these factors are the one which makes the de-dollarization, which everyone thinks of, makes it very, very difficult. But Tyaguji, I would like to hear from you about the corporate bond market, which Mr. Dilip was talking about. What steps, I told about two measures, which of course Government of India, Ministry of Finance is doing it. Anything else that can be brought out to deepen this market? Because the point again he mentioned, more than 50%. If you talk to me, the But the bond market should be equivalent to the banking sector or much more than that.
Yeah, actually, if you take corporate bond markets, we have around 15 to 16% of GDP.
Correct. $50 billion is the total.
Yeah, and actually South Korea has got 70% of GDP, and then US has got 40% of GDP. Basically, it comes out of three problems. One is SLR. Number two, actually our affinity with AAA rated bonds. We don't go down the ladder at any point of time. Actually, as a nation.
No high yield bonds, only high grade bonds.
Yeah, only the AAA bonds we. And then another point, actually, basically, corporate bond markets, actually, you can go with the South Korea playbook, actually. I'm running short of time. South Korea playbook, that is one good idea, actually, basically, how they constructed their bond market and then how they diminished their bank dominance. Actually, that is one point. Another one key point is right now to have a SRO just for corporate bond markets, just like AMFI for mutual funds. If AMFI could do what it had done for the mutual fund industry, a separate SRO for a corporate bond market.
It's coming, sir.
Yeah.
For your kind information.
Possibly.
Not an SRO, but yes, a body is coming.
Yeah, it could be on the, that is, you have in US, you have in Europe. So basically, I think that is one idea. Possibly from there, actually, corporate bond market should take off. Possibly in next 10 years also, we will be discussing the same question, possibly.
So, Mr. Sandeep, I would like to, where the capital markets, what is the single biggest macro risk that you could derail these Indian capital markets? Is that fiscal pressures? Is it capital flow volatility? Is it regulatory fragmentation or something else? But one point I was very impressed is the way in which mutual funds have come into the space. Although there's so much we can do, it's only we have scratched the bottom, but the way in which the mutual funds have brought stability into the markets. But what do you think one thing that can derail it?
So I'll just take an opportunity to talk about the bond. On what was being spoken about the bond markets also, and the segmentation of information related to the duration, the credit, the risk coverage, the derivatives, all the plays will make the market really lively, and I could assimilate a product to my choice, what I can customize to my customer's requirement. And that will be the key. We don't have sufficient information. And as Sir rightly said, AAA bonds, that's a standardized kind of a situation, because if it's a fund, why do I take the risk? Let the rating agency take the risk and I'll do it, whether it might be ILFS. So that kind of situation perhaps changes equations. Now, the concern about derivatives. I'm sure people will be surprised, but I understand we were talking about option writers. The option buyers generally end up being retailers. And options are a right, not an obligation from a buyer's point of view. I was shocked when some of my investors came that they have to make delivery of options they have bought. That was truly unbelievable, because option is supposed to be a right, it is not supposed to be an obligation. And then I could track that with multiple brokers, senior brokers, established brokers, the Zerodhas, the other organizations, where it is written that it has to be delivered 4 days before the settlement. They say that you need to pay 10% extra margin. 3 days before, you have to pay 25%. Then you have to pay 40%. And cornering a retail investor, we have been doing a conference on AI also. Substantial component is AI. In an age of AI with high frequency trade, with the co-location thing just behind us, not completely addressed, we have an option market where I make sure that the option buyer is squeezed out, because it is applicable only for in-the-money options. It is not applicable for out-of-money option. He is anyway burning his money. And with that scenario, if I do a high-frequency trade, and I can make sure that now I have my index to play on where most of the participants are there, and they could be committing on this account. That is where the concern is, which finance ministry needs to address or the regulators need to address. And that is where I am talking about the transparency. Because what is missing is that the core thing which is there where the problem lies is not being addressed. Like very rightly you just talked about mutual funds. The industry has grown very well. And सबको mutual fund सबके लिए सही है. Mutual fund सही है. But transparency नहीं है sir. Transparency बहुत missing है. It's so much opacity in the mutual fund related to the expenses, the breakup of expenses. I'll share with you. I started the industry when I was
I can discuss on this particular point in length with you
Yeah.
over the tea or coffee.
Certainly, sir.
Definitely, because I am very passionate about it, and we can discuss because we
be a pleasure.
take pride in that. But let me discuss and take your feedback, which is very
No,
important.
no, certainly I'll be a
Which
pleasure.
is
I'll
extremely
certainly
important for us to take the
Please,
things
please.
forward. But if I would like to ask, I mean, very, very engaging discussion that we have. Because of the shortage of time, we need to stop here. But I would like to understand one transformational act that needs to be taken in one word or one sentence, if each one of you can say to close as a closing remark. Sir, with you, sir.
Address the challenges of the real economy. Only if the real economy were to work well, function well, your derivatives market will work well.
Yes, sir.
And we have built a wonderful superstructure of derivatives market under a weak foundation. And that's the crux of the problem. That's what needs to be addressed. This is what I built into my report as far back as 1998 for the Government of India. And it's still not redressed. I'm sorry. I have to be candid. And I can only speak about what I have done.
Yes, sir.
So we need to address ground level problems of the real economy. That's it. Sorry.
You know, I have a very simple thing, policy, everything I have spoken, so I will not repeat it, One simple thing that India needs to now learn is celebrate your wealth. Don't condemn it. And I will give you an example, All bureaucrats you go, the moment you make money, they start looking you down. If capital formation doesn't happen, how do you address it? I'll give you an example. One of my friends, why I'm quoting this. One of my friends was going and he wants to do a promoter interstate transfer, a recently listed company, and he has reflected in LODR but not reflected in ICDR. And the SEBI officer is defining what is in ICDR and what is in LODR because you have made money now and he thinks that you are saving taxes to do that. Actually, he is doing it only for charity. And this is what you have to, so don't condemn wealth. Celebrate your victories, That's very important.
Final thoughts from the other two gentlemen as well?
I have a slightly different view. We must celebrate wealth, there is no doubt at all. But we also need policies and programs that will ensure a more fair, more equitable distribution of income and wealth, which is not happening. Why should 800 million people in this country be dependent on 5 kilos of free ration? That's for me a big insult. But abhi kya kare? I think, let me not get carried away. I'll stop here.
Yeah. Fantastic. I think time is up. Would you like to say one word, Tyagu?
Yeah, actually.
Only one word.
Something National Asset Tokenization Program. Project Guardian, actually, Singapore, actually. And then CBD Zero Load. And then a Financial Conduct Authority. These are all the 3 reforms that you should do immediately.
Fantastic. Mr. Sandeep.
So, as Sir just said, it is about a K-shaped kind of an economy. Getting transparency, inclusion, and participation with a regulatory intent for all stakeholders. And I emphasize all stakeholders is critical, which is not present currently. There have been situations where I have seen markets personally experienced when I have been pampered at a different level, and I see challenges when I am at a different level. So those are the kind of things I believe that the industry needs to be transparent in financial sector
Fantastic.
for growth.
Transparency, trust, and technology are the 3 things that is going to take us to a Vikshit Bharat. Thank you very much for such an engaging and insightful discussion.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, on that note, if I would also, can I get volume on my mic, please? On that note, no, they'll rectify it. Check. On that note, if I can have the Director General, IIST, Dr. Shrikanta K. Panigrihiji. Sir, if you can just do us the honor. He's been our chief guest from yesterday. Let's give him a big, big round of applause. And I'd request him to give a token of appreciation to all our eminent panelists. Of course, we're requesting him to stay on the stage and give the individual token of appreciation and gratitude to each and every panelist of ours. And of course, thank you so much, Venkat, for joining us and curating. May we request you to please step forward for a group photograph. All of you in one frame, we'd request you to step forward ahead of the table so it'll get us the best opportunity. Ladies and gentlemen, getting all these brilliant speakers together is no big, no very important opportunity for all of us to learn from the best in the industry.